Have you ever walked away from a conversation feeling vaguely wrong? Like something happened in there, but you can't quite put your finger on what it was. You agreed to something you didn't want to do. You apologized when nothing was your fault. Or you suddenly felt guilty about a feeling you had every right to feel. And then, maybe hours later, maybe in the shower, maybe at 2 a.m. staring at the ceiling, it hits you. You were played. And the worst part? You didn't even see it coming. That's what manipulation does. It's not like the movies. There's no villain twirling their mustache, no dramatic monologue about using you. It's quieter than that. It's a sigh that's just a little too heavy, a comment that technically didn't mean anything bad, a pattern of behavior so subtle your own brain talks you out of noticing it. And understanding why people do this, the actual psychology behind it, might be one of the most important things you ever learn. Not to become paranoid, but to become free. So, let's get into it. Here's the first thing most people get wrong about manipulation. They think it's always intentional. They picture a calculating person sitting in a dimly lit room plotting their next move like a chess grandmaster of emotional warfare. And sure, that person exists, but research in social psychology tells us something more uncomfortable. A huge portion of manipulative behavior is learned. It's automatic. It's a survival strategy that develops so early in someone's life that they don't even know they're doing it. Think about a child who grows up in a home where expressing emotions directly never worked, where saying "I'm sad" or "I need help" got them ignored, punished, or mocked. That child is going to figure something out pretty quickly. The direct route is blocked, so they find a side door. Maybe they learn that getting sick gets them attention. Maybe they discover that crying dramatically shifts the power dynamic. Maybe they realize that guilt is a currency that never runs out. These aren't conscious strategies, they're adaptations. Brilliant, desperate, deeply human adaptations. And by the time that child becomes an adult, sitting across from you at a dinner table, those patterns are so wired in, they're basically reflexes.
Psychologists call this instrumental conditioning, and it's one of the core engines behind manipulative behavior. The behavior was reinforced, it worked, so it became the default. You're not always dealing with a monster, you're sometimes dealing with a person whose nervous system learned the wrong lesson from a very hard classroom. But here's where it gets complicated, because understanding is not the same as excusing. There's a spectrum, and on one end you have the deeply unconscious people-pleaser turned guilt tripper who honestly has no idea they're making your life harder. On the other end, you have something clinical. You have what researchers and clinicians describe as the dark triad: narcissism, Machiavellianism, and psychopathy. 3 traits that, when they cluster together, produce someone who not only manipulates, but does so with awareness, strategy, and sometimes genuine enjoyment. These individuals, and studies suggest they make up a small but disproportionately impactful slice of the population, treat relationships more like resources to be managed than connections to be nurtured. Machiavellianism, named after the Renaissance political thinker Niccolò Machiavelli, describes people who genuinely believe that deception and strategic manipulation are just how the world works, that everyone is doing it and the smart ones just do it better. They're not wrong that power dynamics exist, they're wrong about the conclusion they draw from that. But regardless of where someone falls on that spectrum, the tactics tend to look surprisingly similar. That's the really useful thing to know. Gaslighting, love bombing, guilt tripping, silent treatment, moving the goalposts. These are like tools in a toolbox. Different people reach for them for different reasons, but the tools are the same. And once you recognize the tools, you start seeing the hand that's holding them. Let's talk about gaslighting for a second, because it's one of the most disorienting forms of manipulation and one of the most misunderstood. The term comes from a 1944 film where a husband slowly dims the gas lights in the house and then denies his wife's perception of reality to make her think she's going mad. In psychological terms, gaslighting is when someone consistently makes you doubt your own perceptions, memory, or sanity. That never happened. You're too sensitive. You always do this. You're imagining things. And here's the sinister genius of it. It exploits one of the brain's own vulnerabilities. We are deeply social creatures. Our sense of reality is partially constructed through consensus with other people. When someone we trust tells us our reality is wrong, our brain actually enters a state of conflict. Two contradictory truths can't both be right. And if the other person is confident enough, if they deny persistently enough, your brain will sometimes, especially if you have a tendency towards self-doubt, choose their version over your own experience. You don't walk away angry, you walk away apologizing. There's also something called intermittent reinforcement, which might be the most psychologically sticky tactic of them all. It's the same mechanism that makes slot machines so addictive. You don't get a reward every time. You get it sometimes, unpredictably. And it's that unpredictability that creates the craving. A manipulative person who is sometimes loving and sometimes cruel, sometimes generous and sometimes withholding, they're not just hurting you in the bad moments, they're rewiring your brain in the good ones. You start chasing the warmth. You start working for the approval. The neurological reward circuitry lights up harder for an uncertain reward than a certain one. Your brain, bless its heart, is doing its job. It just doesn't know the game is rigged. So what do you actually do with all of this?
First, and I mean this genuinely, resist the urge to immediately label everyone around you. The paranoid reading of this information is dangerous. Your brain, now primed with new vocabulary, might start seeing manipulation everywhere. That's not the goal. The goal is pattern recognition, not pattern projection. Second, pay attention to how you feel after interactions. Manipulation rarely feels bad in the moment. That's the whole point. It often feels confusing, heavy, or unresolved later. If you consistently walk away from someone feeling smaller, guiltier, or more confused about your own mind than when you arrived, that's data. Trust it. Third, understand that your boundaries are not provocations. One of the clearest tests of a manipulative dynamic is what happens when you try to set a limit. A healthy person might not like your boundary, might even be hurt by it, but they will ultimately respect it. A manipulative person will experience your boundary as a threat to be overcome. They will escalate, guilt trip, minimize, withdraw affection, or reframe the whole thing until you feel like you're the one being unreasonable. You're not. A boundary is not an attack, it's just information. And finally, and this might be the hardest part, sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is grieve the relationship you wish you had rather than the one you actually have. Manipulative people are often people in pain. That doesn't mean you have to stay in proximity to that pain. Compassion does not require sacrifice. You can feel for someone's history and still choose to protect your present. The psychology of manipulation at its root is the psychology of disconnection. People who manipulate have somewhere along the way lost faith in the idea that they can get what they need by simply being honest and asking. That's a tragedy. And when you see it that way, not to excuse the behavior but to understand its origins, you stop taking it personally. You realize it was never really about you. You were a stage for someone else's old performance, and you get to walk off that stage whenever you're ready. If something in this resonated with you, maybe a relationship you've been trying to make sense of, or a pattern you've noticed in yourself, drop it in the comments. These conversations matter. And if you want to keep exploring how your mind works and why people do what they do, stick around. There's a lot more where this came from.